Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast, the Tree Lovers podcast. It's me, Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, as always. In this podcast, I'm going to talk about some midsummer tasks that I've been doing around the yard. So just a bit of a timely reminder, a bit of a prompt about some trees I've been working on, what I've been looking at, what's been my focus, and what I've learnt, I suppose, from things that I maybe haven't done and I should have done a little bit earlier, like removing wire, that sort of thing. And also, I want to have a bit of a chat in this podcast about a general review now for repotting. It seems crazy that we're sort of smack in the middle of summer and I'm talking about repotting trees, which happens late winter, but I find that now is a really good time to identify certain key elements on your bonsai, on your trees that will prompt you to say, yeah, actually that one really needs to be made sure that it's repotted this year. So that's the focus of this podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for listening as always, and let's get into it. Okay, so midsummer tasks that I undertake. If you've seen anything from me lately, if you've seen any of the social media, if you've seen YouTube, whatever, the Bonsai Matsu YouTube channel, you'd know that my focus at the moment is pretty heavily on junipers. And I love this summertime, late summer, midsummer, to get my junipers back in order. It's a nice time when they've had their flush, they're nice and full, they're nice and dense. They need a bit of opening up so they don't start getting too much dieback in the interior sections of the tree, and just a little bit of control put onto them to make sure they're heading in the right path. And I love it because I like with a lot of tasks that I start with, like decandling or junipers or anything, repotting, whatever it is. I always find the first one you're a little bit rusty. Like it's been 12 months since I've worked on a juniper of mine in my garden. I work on plenty in between, but just to do this maintenance side of things and come back and go, okay, so what was the agenda with this one? What was my plan? What was I trying to achieve? All right, so if I want to do that and I've got to prune it and I want to make these pads, what do I want the pads to look like? How do I go about that task? And it's like riding a bike. It all comes back to you over time, but I always find that first one I'm just a little bit rusty on. So I always pick one of my non-best trees from my collection and sort of start with that and go, that's right. Yeah, here it is. It's all back now. And then I work towards my better trees and sort of crescendo around some of the best trees that I consider are my best trees in my yard that I certainly enjoy having as part of my collection. So with the junipers, just want to run through very quickly my strategy for working on them. When they're, once you've got your plan in place, once you know exactly what it is you're doing, I don't recommend jumping straight into cutting stuff off with your scissors immediately because you want to make them look pretty. It's like, okay, what's the plan? Because sometimes not looking pretty allows you to get to your end goal a lot quicker than making them look pretty. So one of the first tasks that I go through, which I do for a hell of a lot of trees that I work on, is to remove the underneath growth. And I find that with junipers of any variety, and in fact almost every single tree that I work on, I like to have a very clean underneath side of the branch. One, because it looks really nice, looks aesthetically pleasing. It starts to show some branching structure as the foliage sort of sits a little bit higher. And that's how I prune. I prune to show a bit of the branching structure underneath and have the foliage sitting a little bit higher, rather than having that foliage like a wig sort of coming over the top of the branching structure. I cut it up a little bit higher so it shows that branching structure coming up like a set of fingers pointing upwards from your hand. Secondly, it also stops the tree wasting resources on growth, which is going to be ultimately removed anyway. So growth that's growing down takes away tree resources. It's going to look unsightly as it starts to get longer and longer. It might fulfill a purpose early days while you're still developing your pads to look nice, but my preference is to remove it as soon as you possibly can, that stuff underneath the branches. Once you've worked out where your pad's going to be, anything growing downward from there, regardless of where it pops back up again later on, I look to remove it because I know from experience that it might not be cut off now, might not be cut off next year, but the year after or the year after that, I'm always going to be in there removing that foliage. which means that the tree's been putting resources into it. I've been pruning it, I've been maintaining it, I've been making it part of the structure, possibly shading something else out along the way, to then just ultimately remove it and go back to exactly where I was, 2-3 years ago when I should have removed it in the first place. So I'm sort of a little bit brutal when it comes to that fact on anyone's trees that I work on, because I think it's, you've got to make that decision sooner or later. You might as well make it right now. So I get in there and knock off the underneath stuff. Then the next part when I'm working with pad structure as well is that I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I'll just go over it again because it's really timely for everybody that's working on them, and not all pad shapes have to be the same. Like you don't have to, pull out your tape measure and go, well, it's got to be exactly 3 centimetres high and it's got to be 5 centimetres wide and it's got to be this. It's horses for courses. The one thing that I try and avoid when it comes to pad structuring is a flat saucer pad. So it's really common to get the underneath part cleaned. It's really common to get your shape top down, and the shape top down can be anything. It can be a sort of circular shape, or like the spades shape on a set of cards, something like that, or the heart, where it sort of comes out and then comes back into a sort of rough sort of point or thereabouts. It's really easy to get, not easy, but it's common to get that part done right. Then the next part, which I think is really important for maturing trees, is to get pad volume. And the pad volume comes from the height of your pads. You've got to be really careful you don't create like a flat top scenario where you've got the underneath part clean, you've got your beautiful shape, but then the foliage just grows straight up and it's hedged off like at a flat level. So my preference is, and what I like to do with my trees, and of course it's all very unique what we do with our design, but I like to, if you imagine you're looking straight at the pad from where that branch comes out of the trunk, I like to look at it and have a high point in the middle and then have that round off to the sides, to the left and right side. So I'm drawing with my fingers in the air, this thing coming down like a semicircle, if you like, for the shape of the pad. So that's as you look at it from the front. So when I'm doing my pruning, I like to get the trees up to an eye height. Because if you're working from, if the tree's very low on a bench and you're cutting from the top down, it's almost impossible to see what shape it is that you're making with pruning. Not impossible, but bloody close to being impossible. So try and get the tree pad height up high enough where, if you can't get it high enough, like put on a milk crate or a trolley or whatever it is to get high, then sit down. So you're working on that pad at eye height. And look, once you've got your unders cleaned, you've got your shape of your pad, like, from the top down, that spade shape or whatever shape it is that you want. You get that shape done. Then look at the pad from where it emanates from the trunk coming out towards you. Look at it from eye height and then work the left and rights. Try and get that rounding so you've got a higher point up towards the middle, and that'll stop you, or it'll help prevent you cutting off the entire guts of the pad and flattening it right back out again. So as the pad matures, you want to try and get that shape. Then the other thing is to then turn the tree on the side. So you're looking at the pad on the side. So the trunk will be, say to the right-hand side, the branch is going across your eyesight towards the left, and then you're looking at the pad from there too. And work the pad so that sort of that circle shape that you drew with your fingers before, that semicircle, you're getting that sort of shape on the pad from where it comes out of the trunk to where it drops off and finishes and terminates at the end of the branch. So that way, really, you've got a nice 3D pad that looks like they talk about the cloud look or pillow or whatever it is, but regardless of what sort of image you want to have in your head when you're doing it, you've got something which is 3D. It's got depth. It's got volume. And that's where, if you multiply that out on every single pad that you work on throughout the tree, and this is really, really, I find it's really important with junipers, which is why we're talking about it now, because I've been doing a hell of a lot of it. Once, if you work that pad individually and you isolate that pad, I talk about isolating pads a lot, but if you can just work on that pad by itself in its micro little world and ignore everything else that's going on with the tree, then you go on to the next pad and you do exactly the same thing. Clean the unders, get the top down shape, then start working from, looking at the branch as it's coming out, whatever angle it is, rotate it on the turntable a little bit so it's coming straight at you, get the left and right sort of dropping down that semicircle, turn it on its side so you're looking now at the side of the pad. front to back, you want that semicircle shape as well. And you keep doing that over and over and over on every branch that's coming out of your juniper, and then sit back and look at the end of it, and you'll see that you've got a really nice tree. It's really important if you're going to be working on a tree that needs some wiring and stuff like that, that you might want to wire or guy wire the branches into place first before you do that. So then you're actually pruning them all to symmetry, if you like, because otherwise if you prune one looking at it from the side and go, yeah, that's it front to back, and then suddenly you drag it down, well, maybe it's tipping a little bit too far forward. So that would be a recommendation, that you get in there, do the wiring, and I'd cut the underneath stuff off first, do the top-down shaping side of it, put some wire on there, and then start doing the pruning process if you need it, or put guy wires on there. I find guy wires for a lot of my more advanced trees, that's more than enough. I use wire where I have to. Like I did this monstrous Femina juniper, this needle juniper, which was one of the latest things that got put on Instagram. So if you're sort of listening to this podcast somewhere in the future, it's late January 2024. If you go back and have a look through, you'll see that this thing got. If you look closely at the video or the images, you'll see there's a lot of fine wires, guy wiring branches down into place. There's a little bit of copper on there, not a hell of a lot. One, because it's as sharp to go through your finger when you get one of these nice old dry needles. But the main thing is that I use the guy wires elegantly, so they're not ugly. I use really super thin wire when I do the guy wires, but it allows me to bring the branches down into place really nicely. And for that one, I'll fess up, I said do the guy wires and wiring first. For that one, because I prune them, they're old pads now, and I prune them all a certain way, that I left that guy wiring and that positioning of the pads right until the very last thing. So I'd pruned everything before I actually put the guy wires down, and I find that I can do that with old pads where I know exactly where I'm cutting back to based on the length of growth that's occurred in the growing season. So yeah, that's pretty much it. But the perspective I've talked before about, perspective of looking at your trees from different angles, and I find that when you're working on pads, especially on junipers, to get to that eye height and look at it from that perspective and keep that sort of image in your mind. And if you think about mowing a lawn, right? So yeah, when you're working on the pads and you're working, looking them straight at you, and you're trying to get that left and right part right, you pick your high point from where you're working, and then prune everything along that line. Then come back to where you started, and then go to the next one. Say, okay, that one's got to come down a little bit further. So let's say you're working towards the right-hand side of the pad. You pick the center point and cut the center point all to the same height. Then go to the right, say about 1 centimetre, and they drop down a little bit and on an angle. So then cut that whole line at that. So then really you'll have this line where, if you've got enough foliage, this is like, you want to cut into the green stuff. You don't want to cut into the brown stuff with the juniper. Just reiterate that. I jumped forward a little bit. My notes say, make sure you let everyone know to cut into the green, don't cut into the brown. So with a juniper, if you're pruning into the green growth, then you've got a really, really super high chance of backbiting occurring in that area. It's almost guaranteed, but I won't say guaranteed because it's not always the case. If you cut into the brown, like a brown branch, you've got next to zero chance of any backbiting. So that's why this pruning should be done on a yearly basis. Otherwise, as these branches get longer and start to extend and mature and get years and years behind them, and they turn from being green growth to brown growth, you lose the option of actually cutting them back, and you have to remove or do something different to try and compact that growth. So staying on this on a yearly basis is super important. So if you do that line way of thinking, and then move to the right a little bit further, drop down another centimetre and cut, then drop down another centimetre and then cut, you'll find that you'll end up with pretty nice shaped pad. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be topiary. It doesn't need to be spot on, but it as long as you get that feel of that cloud, that's how you do it. That's how you go from being a very flat pad to something with some volume in the center of it. And just make sure, the last thing I want to talk about with the junipers before the podcast starts to move on is you've got to be careful. One last thing you've got to do is that you want to make sure that your pads aren't too dense. you don't want to thin them out so there's nothing there. Like you don't want to go back to a 0 point, so you'll lose a whole year's growth because you've cut absolutely everything off, which again is really common. I've seen it a lot. You want to make sure that you're taking steps forward with the development of your pads, but don't leave them so they're so thick that when you separate those pads, there's all dead foliage on the interior. Use the hand test. Remember, you look through. If you can see your hand through the pad, then sunlight can get through there, which means it'll stay alive and air can get in there and you won't have all those bug and fungal issues that come with these things. So once you've got your unders cleaned, you've got your top-down shape, you've got your front to sides pad, you've got your side view, front to back shape of the pad, it's all looking nice. The last review you've got to do is just to make sure that you haven't left the pad too thick. If you've got it too thick, then you're going to need to thin it out. And there's no easy way to explain how to do that, but just cut things back. Now, don't reduce the overall height. So look for things that are on the interior that can maybe be taken out. Keep your ultimate shape intact, but don't leave it so it's so dense that you can't see your hand through that foliage. Otherwise, it might look great this year, but next year that cutback that you're going to make, you won't have much to cut back to because the existing green foliage will be starting to turn brown by then, so you can't cut back to that. And the foliage then starts getting longer and longer, and there's nothing on that interior that's grown fresh because it can't get sunlight and it can't get the air movement in there, and you'll find all sorts of issues with your tree. And I just think it's a really, really important one to make sure that you're on top of. Sorry for the interruption, and I really hope you're enjoying the podcast as much as I'm enjoying making it. Makes the bonsai world feel a little bit smaller and a lot more cozy. Anyway, I'd love for you to become a supporter of the podcast by subscribing for as little as $3 a month. This support will go directly towards the cost of producing this podcast, and it's entirely optional. The link to become a supporter is in the episode notes for each edition. Now that's over, let's get into the podcast. Okay, so one of the next main tasks that I perform at this time of the year, as I gently lean back in my chair and wrap my knuckles on my chest because I'm a bit, get annoyed at myself sometimes when I say this, is wire removal. And it's often, I find sometimes being a bit vague about it because not always the case, so it's not a general rule, but sometimes I find that I've left it on a little bit long and it's probably scarred a little bit more than what it should have. That said, it's mainly on my conifers and my junipers, like I said, at this time of the year that I really keep an eye on them. And when I look through the foliage and you're starting to prune, everything's looking nice, the branch positioning, you're going, yeah, that looks great. You're looking at the wire and go, oh, that's actually cut in a little bit much. That's probably more than what I expected it to cut in. I don't think it's the end of the world. Like, I know it's not the end of the world because the junipers will get over it and they will scar up, and it's just something that I get annoyed at myself because I should have been more on top of this. But the juniper growth, because I only really look at them once a year, I might maybe twice a year. If I'm going to do some serious styling and work, then I'll do it in the late winter period before they wake up for spring growth. But once I find the trees are on the path to becoming a refined tree, then you're not really doing a hell of a lot of wiring. A few guy wires here and there, and it sort of all cuts back. So I sort of get a bit slack with it, and I put them into the yearly maintenance roster. So I only really work them in midsummer, and that means that the wire that's on there could have possibly been there for 12 months. And if it's been there for 12 months already, it could have maybe been 2 years. Some trees, that's not a problem. Other trees, I find that I really should have got on the front foot and maybe had a quick look partway through the year, spend a bit more time looking at them, but I've got a bit slack with it and let them get away from me. Like I said, it's not the end of the world, but I give myself a bit of rap on the knuckles and say, that's one demerit point, buddy. You can't let that happen again. Make sure that you're on top of it. Here we go. Here comes my self-justification. This is not for you. This is for me. I do like having a bit of scarring on there because it helps hold the branch in place as opposed to getting it before there's been some scarring, and then have to rewire that exact same branch, in a couple of days later or a month or so later, because the branches have all started to skyrocket and go up and they're not being held in place. So there you go. I give myself a rap on the knuckles, but then I give myself a pat on the back saying, oh, it's actually probably pretty good, because you've saved yourself a bit of time and that branch is now set in place. So I do prefer, and I encourage you to be on top of wire removal. And the other part to this section of the podcast is to say that if you are going to go and do wiring on your trees at this time in life, being this midsummer period, be very careful. Be very, very, very careful. They can be brittle. You can find that you'll do more damage by rushing ahead than if you waited just a few months. We're heading towards autumn. We're well over halfway now. Daylight hours are starting to get shorter. We're on the path towards dormancy. It's not very far away, and hence the reason for the next section of the podcast where I'm going to talk about preparing for repotting, which seems bloody crazy as I sit here in shorts and thongs, but that's my thoughts go into this podcast and what I'm doing now to try and help everybody sort of be prepared as best they possibly can. So wiring your trees at this time, really, should you wait a little bit longer? Do they need to look absolutely perfect right now? I know you've got time. I know maybe there's not a hell of a lot else to do around the yard unless you've got natives and figs, which I think will be on the next podcast. I'll be talking about them. But I would suggest being very, very careful. And if you do wire, don't be doing major stuff. Just do minor stuff, and just be really careful. Make sure, just the tip of the day, when you're bending something, make sure the wire is on the outside of the bend. If it is on the inside of the bend, I absolutely guarantee you 100% at this time of the year, you are going to snap that branch. So there we go. So be careful wiring at this time of the year. Make sure that you're on top of removing wire that should be removed, especially if you've got wire on deciduous. Please just have a walk around now and double check it, because I'd almost guarantee if that was put on spring, then because of the growth they get, they swell a lot at this time of the year. And that's where junipers swell a lot right now, because I hear all the time that juniper are a slow-growing species, but I don't think they are. I mean, if you look at a deciduous, they get a spear of growth and it takes off, and everyone goes, "Wow, look at that! That's look how much that's grown in 6 months. That's insane! Like it's put on 1.5 meters growth." And that's cool. And if you break it back along there and look at the number of buds, you might have, I don't know, maybe 20 buds along that branch that's shot off, 30 maybe, whatever. And you compare that to a juniper, and every tip on the juniper is growing at the same time. If you get a nice healthy juniper and you look at that new growth before you start cutting everything off, and you look and you multiply out the amount of growth that's actually pushed on that whole tree. So rather than you get the odd spear here and there, on the younger trees there's more of them, so they stand out a lot more. But on older trees, you get the odd spear here and there where you go, yeah, look, it's starting to push, but it's not much compared to my deciduous. But if you can have a look at a photo of one year to the next and look at the amount of foliage that's been put onto this thing, it's insane. That Femina juniper that I talked about before, I probably cleared, I've got this green tub in my workshop, which sits, I don't know, maybe about 45 centimetres high and about 50, 60 centimetres wide, something like that. It's a big circle thing. I probably filled that 2.5 times removing foliage, and there was nothing structural taken off. It was just foliage removal to regenerate the pad structure that I want on the tree. So, that's 12 months growth on this thing. So, and I know it's a big tree, but they're all pretty much the same, where they push out growth consistently across the whole thing. So wiring, remove it if it's cutting in. Double check all your trees if you've got a chance now. If it looks tight, only remove it in the tight areas. Where it's loose, you can still leave it alone so it can still do its job further down the branches. But normally back at the junction where the branch originates from the trunk, you're going to find it's cut in at that point. Just cut the wire at that part, and especially if it's going around the trunk and it's been there for a while, try not to get scarring on the trunk. Secondly, if you are wiring at this time, make sure the wire is on the outside of the bend before you bend it, and be very, very careful. Only do minor, gentle wiring. Don't do the major stuff. Repotting. It is coming. It is going to come at 1,000,000 miles an hour. If you've got a lot of trees, if you've got fresh trees in pots, if you're new and you've got that enthusiastic bonsai bug that we all have, welcome to the community. But you need to be prepared, and you need to understand that you have to put in some work now to make sure that when the time comes around, you can just get straight into it. Because the window for repotting, it's not an hour or a day. You do have a window though that you need to use for repotting your trees. And I love looking at my trees around about this time of year when summer stress is in full bloom and we're midway through the warm period, and you get to see trees in your yard and how they're reacting when they're being watered. When it's hot, and I'm talking some places around Australia copping 40 degrees plus on a semi-regular basis. In Melbourne, we're not. We get into the 30s every now and then. I'm still fearful that our warm period will come later on for us. But for now, we're in a pretty cruisy position where it's this humidity, and woke up this morning even to a bloody electrical storm, and it poured with rain, and to messages of pots being blown, trees being blown off benches and pots being smashed. So who knows? It doesn't feel like a normal summer for me. But anyway, you need to be prepared for summer and for repotting, and that's where summer really for me is the catalyst, because it's the hardest time of the year for your trees. And they struggle. No matter what, they struggle. Even with a mild summer that we've got here, I can see some of the deciduous are really starting to pick up with their leaf damage, and there's issues starting to occur. And watering is primarily one of the main drivers for me to look at when I need to repot a tree. So if I'm watering something and the water just looks like it's running off, and sometimes you can't tell because the top layer of the soil looks okay, it looks wet, there's a bit of moss on it still. It's like, yeah, that still looks okay. And it's like, yeah, okay. Then you feel the surface of the tree because something doesn't look right. The leaves start to get damaged, the needles start to discolor a little bit easier. You might find that its pests start to move in on the tree. Then that's when the red flag goes up for me. When I look at my entire yard, everything's looking great. I don't have a bug issue, and suddenly one tree starts to get caterpillars or aphids or whatever it is. Something starts to come in there, or the leaves start going a funny colour, and that starts dropping off. They go yellow and they start to fall off. It's like nothing else is doing it. Like my other trees of that species aren't doing that issue, aren't having that problem. So why is that one particularly having it? Don't just walk past. Don't just go, oh, it needs a little bit extra water. Sure, it does, and it needs extra care, and there's steps you're going to have to take, putting into a more sheltered spot, maybe getting out a screwdriver and just sort of aerating the soil a little bit. But for me, I'll go along and I'll feel the soil and go, yeah, that's quite compact. There's something that needs to be done with that one. If I've got a tag in it, when was it last repotted? If I've taken videos or photos, when was it last done? Should it be needing to be repotted now? Okay, so how do I now remove pressure off this tree? It may need to be dunked, submersed in water, covering the entire root ball for a 30, 40-minute period every 2-3 days or thereabouts. Does it need to go into a sheltered spot where it's not getting as much sunlight? Should you give it a haircut? Does it need to be pruned back to take the pressure off the foliage? Because if the root system's starting to struggle, should you remove some of that foliage so the transpiration issue gets lessened? And yeah, that's one of the things that I look to do, especially if it's long and shaggy and needs a haircut anyway. Give it a bit of a prune back just to make sure that you've removed some of that foliage so it's under less stress. But so it's if I break it down, it's watering issues. Number one, may not be that simple to tell because, like I said, the top may be nice and wet. You might have nice moss on there, might look all good, but then you start to see leaf colour or leaf discoloration starts to be some kind of an issue with it. That's another flag for me that maybe it needs to be put onto the repotting pile. Lack of vigour, that's the third thing that I look for. If, other trees are having a bit of a kick, especially as we get towards this latter part of summer where the daylight temperatures, the daylight hours start to reduce, but we've still got some nice, mid-range, mid-20s temperature, and you get that little bit of a burst as we head into the first start of spring. That's first start of autumn, sorry, not spring. As that starts to happen, is one tree lacking a little bit to the others? Are the trees pushing out nice new growth, new buds there, or is this one really starting to look like it's gone dormant already? Is it starting to hold back? And the fourth thing I look for is just an overall general flatness. So it might not be dropping its leaves, but it might not look good. Or the spring growth, compared to other trees in my collection, I might have been pruning other trees 3-4 times. I can hardly keep up with the amount of growth that I've got. But this one sort of pushed a little bit of growth, then it stopped. Okay, well, what's that about? It's just generally flat. Like it just doesn't have the vigor and start. It never really got going for the year. So there's some of the things that I really look for when I'm trying to flag these things. And then I'll make a note. I'll put a flag on the tree. Maybe a different coloured ribbon, something just to make sure to say, hey, when repotting gets here and you're inundated and you're very busy and you've got a hell of a lot on the go. This one over here that's got that general flatness, that's lacking vigor, that's had discoloration of the leaf, that's got these bug issues that I'm having trouble watering, that goes to front of the queue. This is the one that gets the priority ticket to say, hey, you're one of the first ones that I repot because I'm going to take my time with you. I'm not going to be rushing you towards the end when I go, bugger, I forgot. I've got to do that one. Quickly come into the workshop, 10 minutes later, yep, there you go, you're back out again. So once I've identified where I'm at with repotting now, the emergency ones, sure, there'll be the run-of-the-mill ones that I look at and go, it's been 3 years, you still look good, but you're on the pile. Or, 2 years, you're a young tree, you're on the pile. Or, hey, I'm really starting to push you and you're only 12 months old, but I know I can see the roots coming out the bottom of the pot. You need to have a repot as well. Those ones will get done regardless. But the emergency ones, they're the ones that identify themselves right now, which I spend a lot of time on when I'm walking around the yard. Maybe based on the previous section of the podcast, I should look more at the wiring. but I do think that for me, this midsummer review for repotting is really, really important. And start pot hunting. That's a really good thing to do at this time of year, because when demand kicks in, late autumn or winter, when everyone's thinking about repotting, it's tough. It's hard to get good pots because that supply will start to disappear. And if you start contacting nurseries and they don't have pots for you now that you really like, ask the question and say, when do you think you're going to be getting your next batch of pots in? Or have you got some nice stuff coming in? Or, when's the best time for me to come back? Or is it possible? Will you let me know when you get your pots in? Can you shoot me a text message because I'm dead keen to buy some? Just ask the question from your local nursery, bonsai nursery. Start having a hunt around on the usual marketplace and all the forums and whatever else, because if you get in early enough now, you might snag a few bargains. But it also, regardless of whether there's a bargain to be had or not, I still think it's a good time to start accumulating. So when repotting gets here, you are fully ready to go. And if you've got 10 trees that all need to go into bonsai pots, don't buy 10 pots. Buy 20. buy as many as you can, because I was saying to someone the other day, you don't have to water a pot. You can store it forever in perpetuity. That it just will go on and on and on and go from tree to tree to tree. And while whatever you repotted into this year might not be perfect, the perfect tree may develop over time that you can swap pots for trees and it falls into line. So I would suggest more pots than what you need, and get them before the demand for them kicks in. Other thing is, go through and do a review of your tools. Do you have everything you need? Have you got all the repotting stuff? Because buying it all in one hit can be expensive, but on the drip between now and repotting season in 5, 6, 7 months, whatever it is, wherever you're based, however you're going to do it, buying a tool here and there that you can switch in and out, certainly won't hurt the bank balance now. And get all the accessories for us too. Do your research. Have a look at, go to the Bonsai Matsu YouTube channel. Have a look on pot preparation. See what you need. Get the pot mesh that you need. Get the right wire that you need. Make sure you've got all your ducks lined up, so nice and early. So when the pressure comes on, you can just jump straight into it and go, yep, I know I've got everything that I need. You can start looking and researching for soil components. Where am I going to get my bonsai soil from? Am I going to buy it from someone? Am I going to mix it myself? All right, so if I'm going to mix it myself, what do I need to mix it with? Like, you can't just throw it on the floor and get a shovel and mix it all together. So, tubs, how are you going to do it? Like, where are you going to store it when you've mixed it? There's so much to go into it that you don't want to leave it to a last minute rush. Make sure that you're prepared ahead of time and study the technique. Look at repotting videos. get into how it's done properly, and make sure that you're up to date with it. So when it does happen, you're fully prepared for it. But the most important thing is just make sure that you flag the bonsai that need to be repotted in your collection. Don't leave it to the last minute. Don't make it I can't remember if that one did okay. It looks all right. It's made it through summer. Autumn's here. Colour looks nice. No, it should be all right. I'll give it another year. Now's the time. Like, summer is a perfect time to see when things are struggling and when they need to get worked on, because it's a harsh time. It's a demanding time for your bonsai. So be on it now. And if like I said, just if there is something going on with your trees, make sure that you take steps now to protect them and make sure they're going to get through this period until you can repot. Don't do anything silly like repotting during the middle of summer. I wouldn't repot during autumn either. I'd wait till the prime window when you can repot and do it properly, but make sure that you're prepared for what's about to come. Righto, tree lovers, that's it. Thanks for sticking around for another fantastic podcast. Really enjoy it. And think about now, before repotting, is the calm before the storm. If you can prepare for the worst and hope for the best, then I guarantee you'll be okay. I don't mean to sound dramatic about it, and not everything that's lacking vigour in your collection is going to need to be repotted, because it may have just been done. But they're the flags I look for when you compound all those effects together, and maybe it has been a couple of years or you can't remember when it was last repotted. Then that's when it gets onto the list to be repotted. So it's a good time, summer. It is nice. I know it does get hot. I know it does get stressful. Hopefully everyone's watering systems are holding up, or your method of watering is sufficient. Increase it as you need to. Just because you've always watered, twice a day, once a day, whatever it is. Summer, the rules change. It might go to 3-4 times a day. I know water bills can be expensive and they can have a real kick in it, but I make that the furthest thing from my memory at this time of the year, because I want to make sure that my trees are looked after and get through this warm period as best they possibly can, and make sure that they've got water when they need them, not just for transpiration, not just for their system, but also to cool the environment down. The pots can get stinking hot, especially when it's 40 odd degrees. So I use watering in those circumstances just to cool everything down. Water gets onto the timber benches, soaks into those, cools everything down, helps cool down the pot. So don't I'm not going to pay your water bill for you, but I wouldn't make the water bill your first and ultimate priority when it comes to this time of year with your trees. Junipers, work on them. Hopefully that pad making process that I use, that I've been going through time and time again and trying to break it down to some audio form, can help, and there's a couple of a new YouTube video on Juniper up on the site. So if you want sort of a bit of inspiration or see how I do it and how I work a tree, then that's the one you should have a jump on and have a quick look at. As always, thank you very much to subscribers. You are the lifeblood of this podcast, and if you're not a subscriber, please think about it, because it means a hell of a lot, and it goes towards the sustainability of the podcast. And those that are subscribers, I thank you very, very much. As always, please keep an eye on those trees. Start the preparation for what's about to come with repotting, and just be on them. And if you're not, and something slips past, like the wire cutting in, like it does for me, don't be angry at yourself. Just accept that we're all human and we do the best we possibly can, and we love these little things. This is the podcast for tree lovers. Thanks for sticking around. Until next time, happy bonsai.